welcome back to my channel. My name is Chris Hong and I am an artist, and today I'll be sharing with you the process for this piece that I titled Carousel Dreams. These are the rough initial sketches I did when trying to figure out the concept for this piece. I was torn between this curled up sleeping pose and this falling pose, both against the backdrop of a magical night sky. I settled on the falling pose because I like the whimsy of the character falling kind of clumsily and yet looking really serene and at peace in this magical environment. I continued figuring out the composition on my iPad in Procreate because I knew there would be many elements in this scene and I wanted the flexibility of being able to move them around and tweak the composition exactly to my liking, which is harder to do when drawing traditionally. Drawing digitally also allows me to fine-tune the drawing right over the rougher sketch. I did the color comp in Procreate as well, taking advantage of the flexibility of the digital medium. I wanted the predominant color to be a warm yellow-green in anticipation of the coming of the spring season, and I wanted the character to be very clearly silhouetted against the background, so I gave her a rim light and made the rest darker than the background so that the high contrast would draw our eyes to the character. Here, I'm showing how I transferred this image to my painting surface. I printed out a mirrored version of the digital drawing on lower opacity, so the lines are faint and not super dark. I printed on two 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper and stitched them together since my painting surface is 10 by 14 inches. I draw over the lines with a graphite pencil. This is because I'm going to apply this pencil side down onto my watercolor paper to transfer it. While I'm drawing the lines, it's an opportunity to fine-tune the drawing even further and make any final edits to the design. I make sure to press pretty hard to draw the lines fairly strongly so that there is enough graphite for the transfer. So here is the finished drawing, and this is the watercolor paper I'm using for this piece. It's the Stonehenge Aqua Hot Press Watercolor Block, size 10 by 14 inches. I place the printout with the graphite side down and I move it around the block to check the placement. Once I like the placement, I secure the printout with some tape along the edges. It's important that this doesn't shift during the transferring process. Then I take a bone folder, which is this thing you see here, and I press down on the lines with pressure to press the graphite onto the watercolor paper. I also use my nails for this, but it does get a bit tiring after a while. I'm working from one end of the image to the other to make sure that I don't miss any spots. When I think I've gone over everything, I carefully lift up the printout to check that the drawing has been properly transferred. And if I miss any spots, which I did here, I use a pencil to draw them back in. This way of transferring is a bit of a tedious process, so I only really use it when I have a slightly more elaborate drawing with a lot of background elements, and I want to really nail the composition. Otherwise, I have taken to transferring by drawing directly onto the painting surface. I think for this piece though, I made the right call by putting in that extra bit of effort. Now I'm ready to start the painting. I started by painting the background elements first, making sure I don't go too dark since I have to reserve my darks for the foreground elements. I go in darker on these foreground layer clouds to create a distinct separation from the clouds that are in the background. I really relied very heavily on the color comp for approaching this painting. Basically, I knew all of the background elements, including the sky, the balloons, and the carousel, had to be lighter in value than the character and the foreground layer of clouds and balloons. I also wanted a dynamic modeling of light, so I treated the up-facing planes with a cooler cast, and I imagined there being a warm secondary light source coming from below, so I treated the down-facing planes with a warmer cast. So this is how I approached painting most elements in this scene. Cooler blue-green cast along the top of the forms, then warmer yellows and oranges along the bottom to reinforce that lighting setup. Now I go into the character, and I know the character is backlit by that moon and carousel, so the values are going to be darker against the background for a clearer read. I block in the rim light edge along the top part of the forms in a very light yellow, sort of as a way to remind myself to not accidentally paint over these areas, since I know I need to keep the values there pretty light. I then paint in the rest of the form with darker values, but keeping in mind that there is a secondary light source coming from below that is subtly illuminating the shadows. When painting the carousel, I knew I had to be careful to keep the values very light, especially the horses and the platform, since I wanted it to feel very illuminated by the lights of the carousel. But I also didn't want the carousel to stand out too much in the background, so controlling my values and making sure to not create too high contrast here was key. It takes me several layers to get the values in the background to work. I wanted the sky to feel dark enough against the moon, and the main carousel horse since I wanted the horse to feel almost as if it's glowing. But again, I didn't want to create too harsh of a contrast since these elements are supposed to read far away in the background with atmosphere between the character. At this point, I switched to using color pencils to take this piece to a finish. Starting by covering up this balloon that was right between the carousel horse and the moon, which was awkwardly cluttering up the composition and breaking up the flow. It really feels like going back in with a drawing pencil when using color pencils. I feel that I have more control over everything, including the design and the colors. I add some subtle visual effects lines trailing up from the shoes to show the falling action of the character. I make these kinds of marks at the very end when I pretty much figured out the picture and there won't be any major changes from this point. Lastly, I bring in some acrylics to paint in the light bulbs around the carousel. I also tap my brush to create some of the smaller specks of stars along the sky in the background. here's how the piece turned out in the end. I'm really happy with not only how it came out, but I feel like all the planning I did in preparation for it really paid off and made the painting process way more enjoyable. I love how there's a variety of colors present, but still feels very predominantly this springy green color, which was exactly what I was going for. I'm happy to announce that Carousel Dreams is available as a print on my shop, along with these other two pieces you may recognize from my previous YouTube videos. They all turned out so nicely, and I hope you think so as well. You can find a link to my online shop down in the description box. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of this piece and this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!